So we better get started if we can. Thank you very much for coming to this workshop, which has been organised between the UKPGx Stratified Medicine Network and the MHRA. We held a workshop with the MHRA a couple of years ago, and that really started to lay the framework for how we start regulating genomic diagnostics. It's such a complicated area, it's such a fast-moving area, that really one workshop was never going to solve it. But what that workshop did was to show that there are multiple pathways at the moment for regulation of diagnostics, and sometimes they don't align, unfortunately, but that's the way sort of, things have evolved over the years. But as we move forward, I think what we need to think about is, and this workshop is part of the process of that, is how we can make sure that we develop a regulatory system for genetic tests in clinical practice, which is exactly what we're going to discuss today. So what I thought would be, I will start with, is start with some challenges for everybody here, and this is what we're all here for. And those challenges are important, and you may not agree with all of those, but you can always argue with me at lunchtime or coffee time, but we can also add to those challenges later on, or we can modify them. So here's the first challenge. How can we develop regulatory pathways that are fit for purpose, proportionate, and do not stifle innovation? We don't want to over-regulate. We don't want to under-regulate. If you under-regulate, it affects patient safety. If you over-regulate, it will stifle innovation. So how do we develop that fit-for-purpose regulatory system for genomic diagnostics? That's number one challenge. Number two challenge, how can we develop a roadmap which aligns the different regulatory pathways that exist at the moment in the UK? That is MHRA, NICE, UKGTN, the NHS, etc. All of those things, how do we bring it all forward? And the clinical laboratories, the accreditation system they have and things like that. How can we align those systems that make it simple and easy to follow for academia? We want academia to develop diagnostic tests in the future. We want healthcare to develop diagnostics and use the diagnostic tests, but also industry as well. And there are many industry representatives here. How can we make it simple and make it much more aligned so that people know where to come off and where to get off? Just like the London Tube map. How can we ensure the regulatory system is dynamic? At the moment, we have an awful lot of emphasis on whole genome sequencing, and that's important, with the 100,000 Genomes Project and so on. But there are new things coming through with the sequencing technologies becoming even more and more sensitive. The liquid biopsies, the epigenomic testing, the transcriptomics, the microRNA, etc. And all of those are going to be important for diagnosis in the future. How can we make sure it's dynamic so we take into account the current technologies and make them fit for purpose, but also lay the framework for future advances? And I think that's important as well. How can we ensure the regulatory pathways are respected and acceptable to overseas markets and regulators? Now, I won't mention the B word, best not to. But whatever we develop here means that it's got to be acceptable to the rest of the EU in the future after 2019. It's got to be acceptable to the US, to the developing markets in the Far East and so on, and it's got to be respectable. So I think it's important that we think about that as well. There's no point developing a system which is just fit for purpose for the UK. Our companies here have got to be able to sell things internationally, and that's important that we make sure that it is acceptable elsewhere as well. And then, most importantly, how do we develop a regulatory system that is acceptable to the NHS? There's a whole lot of, in England, there's a genomics reconfiguration going on at the moment, which is hugely important in terms of aligning pathways and making sure patients get access to these important tests which are coming through, democratizing genomics for our patients. How can we develop a regulatory system that's acceptable to our industry partners? Clearly, there are big companies out there developing genomic diagnostics, but also lots of small companies, and we need to be able to help those small companies develop, work within this regulatory system. And of course, most importantly, how can we make sure it's all acceptable to patients? Because what we're doing here is for patients, for patient benefit, for patient safety, patient efficacy. So those are the challenges. And you may think that I'm completely mad with these challenges. We won't be able to solve all of them today, but I hope we lay the framework and roadmap for trying to solve some of these issues. And what we hope is that we can come out with a position paper, which then starts the conversation and takes us to the next stage. So that's the kind of challenge I'm laying down for you for today. And it's great to see so many of you here with so many different areas of expertise and different stakeholders here, so that we can really move things forward. So let's start off quickly then with the first talk, which is from Ed Blanford, and he's going to talk to us about the regulatory strategy and the generation genome, gearing up for the future. So Ed, thanks very much.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I must say I wasn't quite expecting to be quite so near the audience. It's nice that I can kind of have that level of engagement, but also I'm afraid you'll be able to see how much I'm looking at my notes, because I'm terrified about forgetting to say something or thank someone in the process. So firstly, I'd like to thank Professor Pir Mahad and Krishna Prasad for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm employed as a senior scientist in the Department of Health's Genomics Science and Emerging Technologies team. I first became aware of the network about a year ago when I met Christine at an event. She gave me the pitch all about the network, and then I drilled her for quite a long time about some of the challenges and opportunities for implementing precision medicine and genomics in the NHS. What Christine didn't know was that I was actually rehearsing for the job interview to come work at the Department of Health. So our team has responsibility for oversight of the 100,000 Genomes project, including sponsorship of Genomics England, and we set the broader government strategy for genomics. So that's a lot of work ensuring delivery partners are taking a coordinated approach and everyone's talking to everyone. And since there's a lot of political interest in genomics, it's about keeping ministers informed about progress and plans for the future. So the Chief Medical Officer for England publishes her annual reports on health in England as part of her statutory role. In this report, Generation Genome, she took a detailed look at genomics, exploring how we currently utilise genomics in our health and care system and how its potential may be developed. She asked leading figures from the field of genomics to contribute specialist chapters. So why is it necessary to realise the potential of genomics for healthcare? Well, firstly, there's a growing burden of disease, particularly in non-communicable conditions, and it's placing increasing pressure on our health services. Second, we know that many key first-choice pharmaceutical interventions are only effective in 30 to 60% of patients. And indeed, research published by Professor Pir Mahad not so long ago, which looked at a staggering number of cases, has demonstrated that around 6.5%, which is about 1 in 15 hospital admissions, are a result of adverse drug reactions. This report has identified the opportunities that advances in genomic technology can deliver for clinical practice and public health. And CMO believes that genomic services should be available to more patients while being cost-effective service in the NHS. And this is what she terms the genomics dream. So the key themes of the report included topics such as the care and treatment of cancer, diagnosing rare diseases, the use of genomics in screening and personalised prevention, as well as precision medicine, which of course the targeting of drugs to do the most good and the least harm. Dame Sally also wanted to consider genomics within the context of society, so she included a chapter considering the ethical and societal discourse around genomics. So using the evidence presented in the report, CMO has put forward a series of recommendations aimed at those most able to bring about change. These are a blueprint that will guide how this great potential can be realised to both improve patient outcomes and maintain the UK's leadership role in genomics. The recommendations are grouped in 5 themes, so systems and services, research, data standards and regulation, engaging staff and patients, and some slightly more miscellaneous ones. And these involve a large number of delivery organisations, including the Department of Health, NHS England, Public Health England, Genomics England, MHRA and more. Of course, of particular relevance today, a number of recommendations addressed issues around the regulatory environment, including the General Data Protection Regulation and the In Vitro Diagnostics Regulation, which I know that we'll be addressing in greater detail later on today. Whilst the report is not government policy per se, because the role of the Chief Medical Officer is an independent one, many of the recommendations have already been taken on board by the relevant organisations and progress is being made against them. The next few slides will look at the major progress already made and how the vision of the genomic dream is moving forward. The 100,000 Genomes Project is the biggest national sequencing project of its kind in the world and is unique in that, unlike other global sequencing initiatives, it is a health transformative programme, combining elements of both research and clinical application in routine care. Forgive the cliché, but it is truly bringing genomics from the bench to the bedside. Genomics England is a limited company which is set up by the Department of Health and funded by the National Institute for Health Research and is leading on delivery of this world-leading project. Genomics England are working collaboratively with a large number of key delivery partners. I've included some of these along the bottom of the slide, but there are many more, and excellent progress has been made in the project so far. We've set up a network of 13 NHS genomic medicine centres supported by local delivery partners, which represents foundations of a genomic medicine service in the NHS. When it was discovered that DNA yielded from formalin-fixed cancer samples was unacceptable for sequencing, Genomics England and NHS England worked together to implement a fresh frozen pathway, which is a truly staggering transformation project in its own right. Genomics England have built one of the very few semi-automated bioinformatics pipelines for interpreting genomic data in the whole world, and also have the beginnings of a unique data set linking phenotypic and genomic data, which will lead to groundbreaking research and represents a significant UK asset. And the number you'll see up here of the number of genomes sequenced, GEL update that on a monthly basis, and we're actually expecting the next update soon. So actually, I'm sure the real number is significantly higher than that because we're running at a real pace now. The project is already providing a diagnosis for 20 to 25% of previously undiagnosed rare disease patients. As well as being instrumental in developing genomic medicine in a technical and clinical capacity, the project has been a world leader in demonstrating how genomic medicine can and should be conducted in an ethical and transparent way, and has been a key player in increasing public knowledge and support for genomic medicine. The project is, of course, just one part of the NIHR's world-class research infrastructure in the NHS, which includes the NIHR Rare Diseases Translational Research Collaboration and the NIHR Biomedical Research Centres, which were awarded a record £816 million investment by the Health Secretary last year. So just to touch on briefly, the National Genomics Board. In response to the first recommendation of the Generation Genome Report, Jeremy Hunt committed to setting up the National Genomics Board, which is chaired by Lord O'Shaughnessy, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Health. I don't know if you kind of know how government policy works, but actually any announcement that the Health Secretary makes automatically becomes government policy. So the fact that he did this via Twitter is kind of unusual, but nevertheless, that immediately became government policy. The board's vision is to make sure that the UK remains the world's leading centre for genomic medicine research, and it's to leverage this position to deliver quantifiable benefits for NHS patients and the life sciences sector. The board met for the first time in March and will have its second meeting next month. And if you're interested, you can find details of the board about the members and the terms of reference on its own webpage on gov.uk. So just to talk again now about the life sciences strategy. It's a report written by Sir John Bell, highlighting the pivotal role of genomics among other innovations in the field. And he wrote that the UK has already embarked on two globally leading initiatives, UK Biobank and Genomics England. These projects have positioned the UK as a country that has defined the future of these fields. The report recognises that the UK is a world leader in an industry which in 2015 was estimated to be already worth over £8 billion and employs 10,000 people in the UK and boasts a predicted annual growth rate of 12%. The government's response to that report, the Life Sciences Sector Deal, which was led by the Office for Life Sciences, was published on the 6th of December. The government and the life sciences sector have agreed to a transformative £1 billion sector deal worth close to £2.5 billion of investment in innovative new treatments and medical technologies. These will improve patient lives and drive economic growth in the UK. The deal is expected to leverage about £1.5 billion from private and charitable sectors. The Health Advanced Research Programme proposes that industry, charities, NHS and government collaborate on ambitious and long-term projects targeted at global healthcare challenges. So this is a subset of that broader report. And it will use tech to transform healthcare in the future and drive UK economic growth. The strategy proposes the whole genome sequencing of samples from 500,000 UK biobank participants. So these are people that participate in the project and have had huge amounts of life course data collected while they've been in the project. And the sequencing of a further 50,000 genomes from cancer patients. So it's really exciting that we'll be able to sort of drive forward the commissioning in the NHS by learning more information about cancer patients. And obviously there's that potential to give genomic information in real time about these patients, so, potentially important for recruitment to clinical trials and things like that. And these cancer genomes will be delivered through Genomics England and the NHS. So the 100,000 Genomes project has illustrated the potential of genomics to lead to important improvements in our understanding of health and in the diagnosis and treatment of disease. We need to ensure that we build an equitable national genomic service for all users, which is no longer based on regional expert presence and local interests and funding. This can only be done through national standards and centralised genomic laboratories and related services, and the UK is uniquely positioned to do this. So you may have heard the CMO talk about moving from a cottage industry over to a sort of factory type setup in our genomic services, and that's basically what that's saying. The mission now is for the NHS to continue to build on its leading position and deliver the genomic dream at scale and pace. This means working in partnership with Genomics England to deliver three key things. Firstly, procuring a national network of genomic laboratories for rare disease, cancer and other conditions, working to clear common standards and protocols. Developing a uniform genomic testing directory to direct the commissioning system from single genes up to the level of whole genome sequencing and across the functional genomic pathway. Working with NHS genomic medicine centres to further transform pathways of care and create the multidisciplinary teams and cross-professional infrastructure that will be critical for the future. The NHS is going to be providing vast amounts of data from patients who have consented to have this used for research. This will be a paradigm shift for researchers, requiring collaborative research similar to the way that particle physicists analyse data generated by the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, rather than necessarily having their own mini Hadron Colliders in their backyard. The new service will inevitably raise new obligations and responsibilities for patients, clinicians, their hospitals, and indeed the institution of the NHS itself. And it will mean we need to rethink the wider social contract for medical practice and research in the UK. I realised that at a precision medicine conference, I'm at best preaching to the converted or at worst teaching my grandmother to suck eggs when I talk about the importance of the result of genomic patients can receive more personalised treatments and leading to better outcomes as a result of the work we're doing. But we'll be able to match people to the most effective medications and interventions. This will not only increase beneficial health outcomes, but will also help us reduce the likelihood of an adverse drug reaction or administration of an ineffective therapy that nevertheless may have the risk of side effects. This is something that will only continue to grow as we transition into the National Genomic Medicine Service and continue to develop the evidence through research. NHS England and Genomics England are working together to assess the evidence on pharmacogenomics and identify areas where there are actionable clinical findings and where implementation would have the most value for patients in the NHS in England. So I want to conclude now by talking about a particular illustrative case. Jessica is a lovely, joyful girl, but she has a rare condition which causes epilepsy and affects her movement and general development. She took part in the 100,000 Genomes Project Rare Disease Programme with her parents at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Jessica started to show symptoms early, but did not enter the programme until she was 4 years old. Her genome has 6.4 million differences or variants from the reference sequence, and because Jessica's condition is rare, we knew that the variant we were looking for was going to be rare too. So the next step in this case was to look for all of the rare variants. Simple, you might think. Except it turned out that almost 700,000 of the variants that she has were rare. So Genomics England then narrowed down the 700,000 variants to almost 3,000 that were predicted to cause a change in a protein. And since Jessica's parents don't have the same condition, the next stage was to look at the differences between Jessica and her parents. Of those 3,000 variants, there were just 67 that were different between Jessica and her parents and could be the underlying cause of her condition. Genomics England checked Jessica's findings against their panel app knowledge base. This is a tool which has information on thousands of genes which are linked to rare diseases, as reported by expert doctors and researchers. So one of those 67 variants was located in a gene listed in panel app as being linked to symptoms similar to Jessica's. The name of this gene is SLC2A1, which I'm sure means loads to everyone. This gene basically makes a protein that transports a certain type of sugar into the brain, and you need 2 healthy copies of that gene in order to transport enough of the sugar. And that basically explains the seizures that Jessica had been experiencing. Now, aside from being really helpful to remind us about all the patients that the project is offering hope to, Jessica's case also really exemplifies everything I've already talked about today. Thanks to whole genome sequencing analysis, Jessica's clinician was able to recommend a specific diet for her, which helped her seizures. It's a very successful, very personalised medicine. But also, over the years, Jessica has had numerous standard NHS tests, including multiple MRI scans, lumbar punctures, EEGs, and a whole range of genetic tests. These are inconclusive and therefore an ineffective use of NHS resources, not to mention disruption to the life and work of her family. Jessica has had 151 outpatient attendances across 10 specialties. She's had 12 admissions, and her total secondary care costs have come to over £35,000. And this is not uncommon. It's actually very common for families affected by rare diseases, which collectively affects the lives of more than 3 million people in the UK. So in conclusion, the Generation Genome Report and the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy have laid a blueprint for how we can revolutionise patient outcomes through genomics. The UK is leading the world in the application of genomic medicine. Benefits already for rare disease patients and opportunities for improving cancer care and trials through the 100,000 Genomes Project and the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy Cancer Fund. A national platform for genomics in research, a data access, recontact and discovery has been set up. And strong patient and public engagement and political support has carried this project so far. From October, the NHS will implement genomics as a routine clinical service, which will be the first in the world. It's not uncommon for our ministers to receive questions about whether we can afford to do this, particularly as a more intricate diagnoses may redefine many diseases as rare in their own right. But I think Jessica's case illustrates that a treatment isn't always about expensive new medicines. It also highlights the range of savings that can be made to the health service just by providing a diagnosis much earlier in the patient pathway. So really our answer to that question is that we can't afford not to do this. Thank you.